Every generation loves to complain about the generation coming along, but at the same time, there's a very sharp change with kids who were born in 1995 and afterwards, surprisingly sharp. Beginning with kids born in 1995, they spend a lot less time going out with friends. They don't get a driver's license as often. They don't drink as much. They don't go out on dates. They don't work for money as much. What are they doing? They're spending a lot more time sitting on their beds with their devices, interacting that way. These are the first kids who got social media when they were 13, roughly. They were subjected to much more anti-bullying content in their schools, much more adult supervision. They were raised in the years after 9/11. They were given much less recess and free play with No Child Left Behind. There was much more testing pushed down into earlier grades. So in a lot of ways, Gen Z has been denied the independence, the independent play that previous generations got. Gen Z has been raised with what's called moral dependency. There's always been an adult there for them to go to, and so we don't know if this is for sure the reason, but they seem to have more difficulty working out problems on their own. When we protect children from unpleasantness, from conflicts, from insults, from teasing, from exclusion, we are setting them up to be weak, to be more easily damaged, to be more easily discouraged.
Hello, Joyful Warriors. Welcome to the January Book Club as part of the newly launched Moms for Liberty University here at Moms for Liberty. Moms for Liberty University is an academic approach to educating, equipping, and empowering parents to fight for their children. And this month, this January, we are focusing on social emotional learning, an educational approach that deeply influences children's emotional and social development. Today, we wanted to be discussing the book, The Anxious Generation. It's a book that we've all been reading this month together, and Dr. Jennifer Kalm was going to join us. We haven't been able to get in touch with Jennifer, so we hope that everything is going okay with her, and there may be some technical difficulties that we are working through. So we're going to try to reschedule this book club, and I'm sorry to tell you that we won't be able to hold it today, but if you haven't read The Anxious Generation yet, this is your chance to read it. Maybe this is a good reminder to anyone who hasn't read it yet. Written by social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, over the last decades, rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm, and suicide in adolescents have dramatically increased. And the rate of self-harm for adolescent girls has nearly tripled from 2010 to 2020. Gen Z, typically defined as people born between 1997 and 2012, has been the hardest hit. Gen Z spends more time online in the virtual world and less time participating in real-world activities than any other generation. A 2015 Common Sense report found that American teenagers spend an average of 7 hours a day on screen media. This does not include screen time used for school or homework. This is such an important part of the mental health of our children. And so again, if you haven't read The Anxious Generation, I urge you to read it. We're going to try to reschedule this podcast with Jennifer. She was so wonderful. You may have seen her on our panel for SEL 101. Oh, wait, there she is. Jennifer. We're moms. We make stuff work. It's what we do, right? So a little hiccup at the start is no big deal. So I shared your bio and shared with everyone your background. We did that SEL 101 panel. You were so fantastic. I guess I'll just jump right in and ask you, banning smart devices for minor children or banning social media platforms completely is a very hot political topic. Like, what are your thoughts on this? Because I've got some thoughts too. So I thought we could start with that.
Okay, so if we want to start there, should we be banning it? Well, we know European countries have started doing this. And I'm luckily at a situation here where I can do a survey of students who have grown up within some of those school systems. And what I'm hearing from my students is that there are workarounds. And when we look at what, for example, Norway has done, it's not a one size fits all. And that's one of the problems that I see with Haidt's recommendation when it comes to let's ban smartphones. I think let's back up, regardless of smartphones or no smartphones, big picture in the classroom, we need to provide teachers with the authority to say no and to manage their own classrooms, to trust their gut. One of the slides that, unfortunately, technology being what it was, I don't even want to call it my slides, but one of the slides that I submitted to the show here has to do with mandated reporting. And we need to be mindful as moms of what's happening with our schools. We have two trends that are competing for teachers' attention. The one is see something, say something, where we're encouraging teachers and children. If you see something that doesn't seem right, we want you to say it. Well, unfortunately, we're creating within our schools a closed ecosystem where one of the national centers that is training mandated reporters and producing the materials that teachers use is really cautioning against mandated reporting and giving 10 different considerations that someone should use as an educator or a mandated reporter. Mandated reporters are a whole host of different citizens that come into contact with those that are vulnerable. I don't know if you yourself, but sometimes we get that feeling in our gut that we should say something. So if we can go to the next slide. Yep. The one right after that. Consider this. So here are 10 different considerations. And if you've ever been in the grocery store and, teachers are in their classrooms, it's easy to second guess your gut reaction of maybe this is something that I should say something about. This has a huge chilling effect on teachers, coming from administrators, coming from departments of higher ed, of different things that you should consider before you get to the point of reporting. Because now, as they're telling us, if we can go back to the first slide, mandated reporting 1, that this is just one option that you have, one option amongst many. Now, again, 2 things: see something, say something. So we're producing a record on kids from themselves and from the teachers and from their peers. And going back to socio-emotional learning, you have a lot coming out in the classroom that historically hadn't come out because it exceeds education. And so we're doing a lot of therapy in the classroom. We're having a lot to report about. And at the same time, the very people who are putting together the training programs that should be encouraging us to report are actually doing the very opposite and saying this is just one of the tools that you have in your toolbox. So there's that. So then, should we have children in the classroom without a cell phone? Well, in the context of teachers not being given authority over their classrooms, I really question this. And I know from talking to my students again, that there are many occasions that they've had where, when I asked them to reflect on their childhood, and the question was, can you think of a time when you really needed to use your cell phone? And it was of importance. It wasn't to text a friend. It wasn't to do something else. It was genuinely important. Almost to the letter, each and every one of them had some recollection of a moment in time where an adult wasn't nearby during an emergency. It was an adult was nearby, but as we've all been in the situation, our cell phone wasn't charged or wasn't accessible. We also had situations where the adults froze and didn't know what to do. So I would argue that putting children into a school-wide system without that safety net of some means of communication is not wise for us. And my European students said that there's workarounds that parents, not just kids, but that parents would do. And it was buying their kids a second cell phone. So you turn your first one in and you have your second one. Now, I don't think that we need to have second cell phones. And I think that the idea of, and we'll get to that in a second, of when we should have cell phones with children. But I think the better idea here would be to have smartwatches. So those are really dumb devices that are, a friend of those who are in divorced family, shared custody situations, where it's just a restrictive device. It only allows for texting. Think in terms of the Gizmo watch. There are a variety of different styles and price ranges, but very dumb devices that children can have on them at all times. And I think that's the better, as far as keeping children safe, which is our primary responsibility as parents. A Gizmo type watch is better than a cell phone because it's always on them.
Yeah, this is so interesting. So I bet there are a lot of people, because the gut reaction is, ban the phones, right? Get rid of the phones. But and so I think there are probably a lot of people that are like, wait, I thought it was a really good idea to get rid of the phones. Interestingly, one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason, that teachers are leaving the classroom is discipline issues, violence in schools and discipline issues. So I think you bring out a very important point, which is the fact that without that authority in the classroom, without their ability to discipline the class and say to a child to put their phone away. And I hear from teachers it's very difficult, but because we've taken them out of that role, we're really not addressing the problem when we're getting rid of the phones. As far as I'm concerned, is in the discipline issues in the school. Now, the attention of the children. Yes, I think there are a lot of people that would counter and say, well, Jennifer, the schools, we're trying to eradicate all the bad stuff happening in the schools so that the kids, we won't have to worry about that. But you're right. Right now, we're kind of trapped in a situation where parents are being bombarded with information, right? What if libs of TikTok didn't exist? You see some of the videos of the fights that are happening in the schools, or so I hear what you're saying, but I bet there are a lot of people that counter your thought. Do you get some pushback on that?
Absolutely, lots of pushback, because again, in the current situation, shouldn't we just be removing it? Well, this goes into we as parents, back in the day. So let's talk back in the day. Back in the day, Generation X was sold on this idea of it taking a village. We as parents need to make individual decisions for ourselves. Step one, because when we look at, Haidt does a great job of looking at how much technology is being utilized by the teen generation and under. What he's not talking about is the millennials. The millennials are using close to their children's amount of cell phone usage, as is approaching Generation X. Baby boomers, not so much, but we have a problem ourselves. And when we're approaching that level of engagement, we, step one, need to regulate ourselves with our own cell phone usage. Number two, then we need to really carefully evaluate, which is one of Haidt's first recommendations there, is that we don't give smartphones to kids before high school, that this just isn't a thing. So we don't have to ban them, that parents don't provide this to their child to take to school. So we make decisions in our own homes. And that's step one, because as much as we'd like to take a village and let's talk our schools and let's talk the school boards and let's talk the state, that's one avenue of facilitating change. I know when I read through this book, it seemed, and I would imagine many moms, a weight on your shoulders of what do we all do? And now I have to gather with my friends and I have to gather with my neighbors and somehow change my school policy. Those are all wonderful things to do. In the meantime, though, we can start small within our own homes. One of the examples is, again, where do we start social media? I love his idea of starting it right around age 16. And why age 16? Well, historically, when millennials were coming of age, we had, what was his name? James Coate wrote a great book, Arrested Adulthood, talking about how we've eliminated rites of passage for children. And so we have this extended adolescence. And that's where the millennials came of age, during a time where they themselves had a hard time and delayed onset of adulthood. Well, we still have retained in the United States this wonderful thing called your driver's license. And so the idea that here would be that once we are mature enough to make life and death decisions behind a wheel, that's a good time for then us to also grant access to a cell phone. I think that's a wonderful pairing that we could have as parents. And it makes sense for kids that that's something that you work toward. Now, someone could say, okay, what about though my kid is under 16 and they already have a cell phone? That's something that I've already purchased for them. Well, then I would ask you if I'd show you a picture of a weed pipe, which I just recently learned we're not supposed to call it pot pipes anymore because that dates us. So if you had a weed pipe, and I would ask you a series of questions, would you let your child have this? Would you let your child have this? What if they told you, though, that you spent $500 on this said weed pipe? What if their father spent $500 and contribute also? What if they told you that everyone else had one? Wonder if they told you that they were going to be extremely miserable if they didn't have access to this, or if it was their method of socializing with all their friends. I think we'd all would say no to all those questions. We need to just say, this is very similar to a weed pipe. This is not something that we allow in our households. We may have historically, but now, yes, mom and dad read this book and we discovered the lights went on. This is not something that we should have. And
So you bring up a good point. We can take the weed pipe down. Thank you, moderators. Appreciate that. You bring up a good point that I did give my two. Oh, there we go. There's the weed pipe and we're still allowed to call it a cell phone. Is that still, you work with the kids? So okay. So it's still a cell phone. All right. So I did give my older two kids cell phones when they were around 13, 14. And then I have two younger children and they're very annoyed with me because they do not have cell phones and they're continuing to age. And they're like, well, you did this for one kid and you didn't do it for the other. And I was like, I am an adult, and adults are allowed to acknowledge that they make mistakes sometimes and then correct those mistakes. I'm not like beholden to the mistakes for raising all of the children, right? But as a mom, you do have to step up and do that. Now, we're going to move on, but I do want to touch on this point. there is a First Amendment issue to the social media bans that I think has to be addressed. In fact, Governor DeSantis vetoed a bill that would have banned minors from social media at ages 14 and 15 without any parental consent. There's another bill that was actually struck down by a court in Ohio that said that even with parental consent, that banned kids from 14 and 15 from social media, and that was struck down based on the First Amendment rights of the child, of the to be able to access information. And so it's a very interesting topic. It's one that we're going to continue to address. I would just say to you, Jennifer, I'm all about putting parents in the driver's seat. I want to give parents accurate information. That's why we do M4LU, so they can make the best decisions for their kids, right? And so there's a bill right now that was sponsored. I think Mike Lee sponsored it in the Senate. And I know there are a bunch of different states around the country that are putting age verification in the App Store for some of this stuff, so that parents will be able to control that themselves. You won't have to give out your data to individual apps, but you be able to just do it and give your child access or not. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a great strategy. Again, I would go back to the parents, though. We need to start regulating ourselves and lean into our own self-control. Before we can control others, let's control ourselves. And then as we grow in our own control, because if the children see us continue to use our phones during dinner time, use them during vacation, use them during the weekends, when we think that the bulk of parents today are approaching the rate of usage as their children, that's while they're having presumably full-time jobs. So that's a lot of time, presumably during what could be family hours, that we're engaging in phone use ourselves. So I think the apps, that there are a whole host of apps that help you monitor your own use, and then absolutely pivot as a family that this is what we are going to do. Why? Because I've decided that we are going to do this. And it is a new idea. And I didn't do it with your older brother and sister, but because I now am an adult who is aware of this, this is my job as a parent, is to react to the information that I now have on hand.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Gen Z, you work with, I said you work with the kids. Gen Z is considered to be what ages right now?
Sure. Let's go to, I provided a slide for that because that's helpful if we all have an orientation on where we are with the various age groups.
And the question I'm going to ask you about Gen Z while you look that up is that it seems they've suffered the most from the great rewiring of childhood. How can we help this generation whose brains have been fundamentally altered by this dependency on technology as moms? What can we do?
Okay, so there's our slide. So
Okay.
Gen Z is 1995 to 2012. Okay, so these are kids that are 15 to 29 years of age right now. So also one of the mistakes that Haidt makes is that intro where he says we've shipped our kids off to Mars and we didn't know what was happening. Well, actually, way back in the day, this book was originally published 50 years ago. It was a plug-in drug, Television, Computers, and Family Life. It's by Marie Wynn.
Okay.
And at that point, I have the 25-year-old edition published in 2002. And now this in 2025, this makes it 50 years old, where she was already raising the alarm that television was problematic. Social science researchers, this is not a trip to Mars. We're 50 years into this experiment of shipping people to Mars. And already back in the day, we were looking at, if you wanted to have a master's thesis back in the, say, 80s through early 90s, all you had to do was look at the relationship between television, hours spent on television, and vegetable use, swearing, smoking, alcohol consumption, using a library card, etc. It's a well-established body of literature, but unfortunately, when cell phones came onto the scene, people failed to make the connection that this is essentially a tiny TV. And so most people took televisions out of their children's bedroom,
Right.
but then bought a cell phone. So we know that this is well established, that type of experience, and he calls it the opportunity cost, is one of the phrases that Haidt uses, that it's not just what are they doing, it's what are they doing instead. So instead of all the opportunities, when we think of in terms of attachment, we have a narrow window as parents to really lean into helping children to trust primary caregivers. That's us. That's the parents. They need to trust us and lean and turn toward us. We're the shepherd. When they hear our voice, we want them to have an automatic turn. We all have that mom face where we make the mom face, and across the room, that kid knows that this is not okay. We need to practice the art of that. But the reality is, if we're on our phones, they're on their phones. We don't, as Coate would say, we don't have these rites of passage rituals that children can count on and work toward. We've really done a disservice. And a little bit more about this. So the millennial parents, who are primarily the cohort that is parenting most of Generation Z, they are, as a whole, when we look at it from a parenting style perspective, as a group, they've adopted a very indulgent parenting style. So the indulgent parenting style is known as the friendship model, where we want children to like us. We want children to share their feelings with us. We overshare with our children. We involve them in our relationships. We involve them in trials and tribulation in our work life. The outside world is, yes, coming in through cell phones. It was coming in before through television, and it's unnecessarily traumatizing kids. And then we are not acting as a responsible adult, the responsible person in the room who has a plan. And here's one of the secrets of parenting. Sometimes we have to fake it because we don't have a plan. And so we just have to look like it so that people will follow us. These little people who we're responsible for, we just have to go with our gut reaction. And not, regardless of what the studies say, we just have to do it, do the best we can, and then periodically change course.
Right, exactly. Sometimes you make a mistake and you say, this wasn't the right thing and I'm going to correct it. You're right. And it's important to do that as a parent. This really, the fact that you're talking a lot about instinct and trusting your gut as a mom, as a dad, and then it brings me right back to the SEL 101 panel, when we talked about how social emotional learning is taking, the instincts that we put in our children, us telling them when your tummy feels funny, when mommy's not going to like that. Right? Don't do that if you get that feeling. And social emotional learning, as we talked about, is subverting that. It's telling the child that being uncomfortable in an environment might be okay, and that something that goes against their parents might be okay too, and that is antithetical to the home. It's so scary, Jennifer, what's happening in our schools. So at the same time, when schools say we want the phones away, then they're doing this social emotional learning bait and switch, where they're really doing values clarification with our kids. We have some questions, but I'd like for you to just reflect on that for a second, if you could.
Okay, so in the classroom, when we're bringing up sensitive content that exceeds education, so when we go beyond an orientation to a subject matter, and we're really doing clinical work, we're doing diagnosing, we are delving in. It's one thing to have, again, as I talked about last time, a friendship program that outlines what you should do. But then when we transition with the children into doing the actual group work, which should be done privately, we've really exposed children and we've heightened their emotions, because it is, when we talk about our private lives, that's going into a different realm than the emotional. And it is inadvertently, I do not think that most teachers intentionally intend for this to happen. But the reality is that the children are aroused in a sense that it sets the stage for dysregulation, because we quickly transition from that time into our math, into our geography. We don't have time and the ability as a child to process all of what I just experienced sharing with you my life, much less all the other children in the room, what's going on with their lives. So we're changing the environment of school unnecessarily. And it's going in a direction that is it's impossible for teachers to manage. And then you throw technology as a great escape into that same environment. It's just a recipe for disaster. And so what do we do for our own children? Again, going back to what do we do? What can we do? Can we reshape society? Perhaps. But in the meantime, with our own children, we can do things like set limits. We can share why we're setting limits. We can involve them in the process. I'm looking at these apps. Which do you think would be good for you? What are the concerns that you have as far as putting apps on your phone? Of your friends, let's troubleshoot. Of your friends, who do you think is going to give you the biggest pushback on doing this? And let's role play. Okay, so you're your friend Julie, and Julie thinks that this is crazy, and Julie thinks that your mom is maybe borderline abusive. Okay, let's talk through that. I'm going to talk it through, not the teacher, not somebody else. I'm going to talk it through, not a YouTube video that your child is going to look up and to take you down. Because again, the smartphone provides all these wonderful resources to undermine your parenting.
It truly does. And we're going to take a question from Shirley because I know she needs to go. For the audience, we're going to go till 2:15 today with Jennifer because we started a little bit late. As Shirley joins, I just want to give a helpful hint from a mom who may or may not be on here. I'm not going to mention her name because I don't want to give away her secrets, but she had an awesome idea. She goes in to her kids have social media, they're teenagers. She goes in and she sets their algorithm. She'll go and like certain things so that there are certain things that come into their feed. They don't even know that it's happening. And she's seen a change in the things that they'll talk about or their opinions about things based on the fact that and I had not thought to do that, but it is really quite genius. So just a big shout out to that mom. You know who you are. Really, really great idea. So Shirley, do you have a question for Dr. Jennifer Combe today?
Okay. Yes. All right. I have a twin sister. Okay. My mom had five daughters in under 6 years. 3 older sisters. They were 5, 4, and 3 when I was born with my twin sister. And in those days, the doctor was not aware that there were 2, and I was born, and my mom said, there's another one coming. So my father was an alcoholic. My oldest sister was kicked up the stairs when she was a toddler. My twin sister and I were handed off to 2 older sisters when we were the babies because I think my mother was overwhelmed. My third sister got to take care of the dog, not a baby. And after my mom died, the third sister was still angry at my twin sister, and this was 47 years later. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom while daddy worked on his welding business and developed real estate. So anyway, I'm talking about secure attachment. The needs of the infant are met. The baby is comforted and experiences safety and develops trust. The insecure attachment, the caregiver is absent, distracted, lack of affection results in an out of balance nervous system. The child feels unsafe and insecure with no one to rely on to meet those needs. The baby fails to develop a sense of trust and safety, which is ultimately brought into adulthood. Your thoughts?
Okay, so you described a complex family situation that set the stage for having some attachment issues. But here in the life we always have to look at it from the life of an infant, from their eyes. Mm-hmm. This doesn't have to be a complex family system. This could just be mom started watching Grey's Anatomy. To help her with her postpartum depression. Mom started watching Grey's Anatomy. She's not making eye contact with the baby. She's delaying some of her caregiving practices. Happy home, but the reality from the infant's perspective is my needs are not being met. You're not emotionally coaching me. You're not the synchronous relationship between a mom and a baby is disrupted. It could also be mom starts doing shift work. Mom has a legal case coming up and really needs to spend a lot of time at work. There are so many things from the life of an infant. The infant doesn't care what's distracting you, whether it's your lawn mowing business, a complicated situation with other older siblings, health issues of other siblings. The infant just comes ready to learn and ready to attach. Their first gaze is absolutely wondrous. When they come out of the womb, I would strongly encourage anybody who's about to have more children, you want to have that responsibility, have the very first gaze that your child has be with you. And that very first smell is not some nurse named Jane that they will never see or smell again. It's you. And then kangaroo care, you keep on with that pattern of interaction as often as you possibly can. Now, obviously, we need to get to a point as human beings where we need to self-soothe. So yes, we need to put the baby down periodically, and the baby needs to learn how to have a nap, and we need to learn how to sleep through the night. Those are all wonderful things. But when we are around other human beings, we need to attend to them, not Grey's Anatomy, not all the other distractions in our life, but we need to make sure that we're seeing those human beings and that we're validating their existence. And not doing so, as you rightly point out, sets the stage for some attachment issues. So then the next stage is wonder if we have those attachment issues. Looking back on our childhood, what do we do about that? Well, the good news is knowing is a huge part of the solution. So that helps us understand then our immediate physiological response to times of stress, 2 times when we feel that we're not being heard or seen. We understand that the severity of the situation, that our physiological response may exceed what the environment is calling for us right now, that we may be over responding. And with that knowledge, we can start to soothe ourselves in a way that our caregivers perhaps didn't early on. And then we can reason through the situation in a way in which, as a child, we couldn't do.
Mm.
So it takes a lot of effort because, again, it's automatic. We're automatically alarmed. We're automatically feeling threatened. And we also, when it comes to then our own caregiving practices, we may have some learning to do. We may need to we need to recognize that we don't want to repeat those caregiving patterns that we historically had. When I go through this whole line of reasoning with the students, I have them outline where do they think, because it's easy when we look at, okay, when I show you the different attachment styles, which one do you want? Everybody obviously wants the secure attachment. But when I describe the home life and I describe situations, it's important for us to recognize where we're from, because we're more likely to repeat that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you for that, Shirley. Thank you so much, Shirley, for your question. I appreciate that. And I see, moms and dads, anyone watching, check the chat in the comments, because there are some great people that are saying for more information on infant attachment, I highly recommend Dr. Erica Commissar's videos. So there may be some resources, additional resources for you there if you want them. I'm going to go back to the book, if I could, Jennifer, for a moment. So, in chapter 5, Jonathan Haidt discusses how addicted children are to their devices. They're almost always on a screen. Even when they're not, they're still subconsciously in the virtual world. How can we help our children develop healthy relationships with their devices when these technology companies have made their phones so addictive, or the apps so addictive? And then a second part I do want you to speak about, because someone said it in the chat earlier, they're concerned about the screen time in the schools. I'm concerned about the screen time in the schools on the Chromebooks, the one-to-one devices, right? And a lot of what I saw during COVID, which was a response to virtual learning, which is, I think, an oxymoron for the kids. But a lot of app-based learning, a lot of programs that were digital programs that I have seen now schools bring into the classroom, because as it gets harder and harder to find teachers who are qualified to be able to teach, all you need is a babysitter if the kids are on the screen all day. And so that's a perfect storm happening. But let's talk a little bit about how we can help our kids to develop healthy relationships with technology, because it's a part of their lives.
Okay, so step 1, we do not make good decisions when we're tired. So we know that Generation Z is getting less sleep than previous generations. That's a problem. So step 1 is that we do not allow, I would argue that when we introduce cell phones, that we don't have solitary use, that you're always using it in a social context of the family. Step 1. Step 2 is that we never allow it in the bedroom, and we never allow it before bedtime. So we instill in our children healthy sleep habits, because a healthy, well-slept individual, we're going to be able to solve problems better during the day. If we're sleep deprived, we're going to run into those same habits. And this is a habit. Checking our phone, responding to texts, going on social media, it's an automatic pattern. And in the lives of children, they don't remember, many of them, a time without it. So how do we break that habit for them? Well, we establish really good, firm patterns at home. One of the firmest patterns that we can have is a firm bedtime, an unapologetic firm bedtime. We have daily meals together. Daily meals means that we do not have our cell phones out. No one does. It's a media-free zone. The television isn't on in the background. Mom and dad, we're putting it away. So we're having media-free opportunities at multiple points during our child's day to really instill in them this idea that you can live without this device on you. Because again, for many kids, they don't remember a pre-time. All of us remember a pre-time. Now, what can you expect when you start doing things like a firm bedtime without a cell phone? No, firm having only in the context of other people usage, you're going to expect an extinction burst. So kids have a habit, and whenever we break habits, sometimes we go back to our habit and we use it even more. We tantrum, we get angry, we have these emotional reactions because our favorite toy has been taken from us. Expect that. Expect and share that with your child. Say, I know that this is going to be really tough at the beginning, and you're maybe going to forget it for moments, but then it's going to be like this
Worse.
all-encompassing experience that you want this. Know that this is normal, and we're going to push through it together, and then provide distractions. So one of Haidt's recommendations was outside play. And he made the quote that kids need to be outside. They need to be comfortable with one another. This is how they grow. Well, I would argue that they need us. They need our time and our energy and our resources. We go outside with them. We maximize the time, the little time that our busy lives afford with our child. We maximize that time. And not everyone is going to enjoy outside play. Part of having this conversation is which kids. So kids exist in the context of ages. You mentioned that you had some younger children and they have different rules than the older ones. So you exist in a context of which birth order are you? We are males and females. We are introverts and we are extroverts. So not everyone is going to like this one size fits all, any one size fits all recommendation. We have to look at what works for our kid. So perhaps for the introverted child, it's going outside together on the deck and reading for an hour every day. It's going on a walk around the neighborhood with me. For the extroverted child, yep, maybe it is going to a sports game. Maybe it is going to a playground. Great, but we look at the particular child. One of the mistakes we make in trying to fix this is we do one size fits all solutions, which we lose our humanity. We experience childhood and we experience our days as individuals. So what's good for this particular individual and this particular family? We're all starting at somewhere, so our own unique point in this journey, in our own relationship with media, our husband's relationship with media, our particular family, and our family right now, because the family we have right now may be very different several kids in.
That was a great answer and important to really kind of get to know your child. But I love the point that you make to stay connected and to spend that time with them, to not just say go play, although it's good for them to go play. I mean, listen, I've shoved kids out of the door on a summer day and said, I'll see you back at lunchtime. And I'm lucky enough to live in that environment. I know some parents would say they're concerned about doing that, right? But what I'm hearing you say is also us putting down the devices and modeling for the kids how to live and enjoy life without it being constantly through the phone, which is important and hard to remember, honestly, as someone who, runs social media for organizations and, tries to stay current. And, X, to be honest with you, has made social media such a breaking, news factor, right, of our lives. And so, we are on it. So it's a great reminder. I think we have another question.
I can add one more thing to that response.
Yeah.
So the reality is, if we start doing this, while I mentioned an extinction burst for the children, we need to be honest with ourselves. This is a shift in how, for many of us, we've done family life.
Yeah.
And once we start putting down our phones and really tuning into our kids, parenting is a lot of work. It's a little less work if we can distract ourselves with our phones and if we can have the kids be distracted. We need to be honest that we're going to have our own little extinction burst. And as we do this change in our family system, we may need to embed in time apart. So consider having family vacations where mom and dad go on a family vacation and the kids go with grandpa and grandma. Consider having the kids go to camp, because it's going to be a lot more FaceTime and a lot more togetherness that we perhaps have not been used to. And we just need to build that in so that we maintain what we know to be an overall good course of action. But
are you saying that I'm going to need to reconnect with my husband as I put the phone down and rebuild that relationship? Is that what you're saying, Jennifer? That adult moms and dads need to reconnect?
True, but also, quite frankly, we need to be honest. We're going to get sick of our kids. So the reality is, to keep this up and not go back to this habit, we need to build in. We're working toward.
Oh, that makes sense. I see what you're saying. That makes
working toward a little bit of time apart. We're working toward, experiencing something fun. The kids can go on exchange programs. They can go. The kids have camps for virtually everything. And again, some may say this takes money. Well, you may save some money by not having to pay your kids' cell phone bill. So there's that. But also, kids are going to get our time and our energy and our money. We just have to choose how to give it.
We have to choose how to give it to them. You're absolutely right. I think we have another question. I'm going to read while the next questioner comes up. I think it might be, there's Amy. I'm just going to read a comment from the chat, Amy, and then I'll let you ask your question. Kimberly says that Chromebook homework demands use at bedtime for high school athletes who start homework at 7 or 8 p.m. The Chromebooks are what I have caused the issues in my home. I can manage cell phones, but schools are dictating tech use due to the assignments given. I really hope the overall conversation moves towards Chromebooks in schools in the near future. Such a good point, Kimberly, and I promise you, we will make sure we get there. Amy, go ahead.
So it's funny you should say that, because I saw that right before, and I'm kind of relating it to my question, because I'm of the Gen X generation where I totally neglect my children, and I will fully admit to that. I shove them outside, I let them play outside till dark, and then they come in. I haven't allowed my kids to have phones until high school, and they're fine. They're totally fine. Now, the question is, how do we get things like Chromebook out of our schools and phones out of our schools when there are other parents who are not neglectful and they are indulgent and, oh, my child needs a phone because they need to be up on social media? It seems so obvious to me that social media is not good, but there are parents who say, oh, they've got to be with the in crowd, so they've got to stay on social media. Well, to me, that's very self-indulgent, and that's not really what we should be teaching our children. So anyway, it's just kind of one of those things where there's so many different ways of parenting, so many different kids. How do we incorporate that with our districts, school districts, and say, hey guys, let's stop this screen time in some way? How?
Okay. So that was a lot. So
You're
let me back up to, okay. So the one big picture is, what do we do about schools? That's a complicated situation. That is going to take policy changes. That goes into the teachers' unions. That's a complicated system. I honestly don't have a response to that other than to say, yes, we should be doing that. We should be going in and saying, this may not be the best. Teachers, the love of learning, are we putting out fires, or are we going toward the end in mind here is an adult who enjoys learning, who is excited about complex problem solving. That's what we want as our outcome. In short, we want to have people, from an educational standpoint, we want to introduce the love of learning so that you can be a lifetime learner and lifetime problem solver. Teachers, the humanity that they bring into the classroom, you can't get through a Chromebook. And so, but we have, it's just, teachers are just like us. It's easier to have, given the pressures that they're having to now be therapists, and they don't have control over their classrooms. They are physically being threatened in many cases, spit on, kicked, sworn at. It's a volatile work environment for them. So I understand where they're coming from. It's keeping the savages calm.
Yeah.
So how do we battle that? That's a complex question, but it's a battle worth having, because again, we do not want to give our humanity over to a device. There is a place for a device. Absolutely. The idea of having the world at our fingertips is absolutely a blessing. And over time, I have to believe that when we look at the Generation Z, the challenges that they're being faced with at such an early age, our brain doesn't distinguish between the trauma, drama, fighting, war that they're taking in that's not real. It can't discriminate. On a neurological level, it can't discriminate. The silent generation had legit actual wars that those folks lived through. And they grew up toward their early adulthood and then middle adulthood to be the people who were amazing. They were the ones who, when their guys came back, created bowling teams. They had group songs that they would all know. They had all of this structure and rituals, and they brought the humanity back. We need to figure out how to do that for our kids. But you know what? I do hold out hope that this group, just like the silent generation, will do it for themselves once they're old enough. So that's that I think, while it's threatening, at the same time, I think other generations, primarily that silent generation, they lived through their own trauma and they came out stronger for it. And I do think Generation Z is in the same position. Now, the other question that you raised, though, or hinted at, was what do we do, though, when everyone else wants to do this? And when it's our kid is the only one at the birthday party who doesn't have a cell phone on, or when they want to have their birthday party and have it cell phone free, some of their friends don't want to come. This is part of, I would engage your children directly in this conversation. Go the path of the Stoics. We are going to be different in this family. Yes, acknowledge it. You are going to have fewer friends. Some things are not going to be with you. We cannot have everything in this world. We need to make choices. And so that may mean that you are not going to be the most popular person on the team on your team. For some, this may mean that you can't, because of the priorities that we have at our home, you maybe don't get, this particular team with this particular coach, with this particular set of expectations is not a good fit for you.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the most kind thing you can, best thing to do for your kid is say no. We know that. It's hard sometimes. Heritage Foundation that I love, and I'm going to go lead a parental rights initiative there. I'm working with them. They had me out at a press conference for TikTok and banning TikTok. And I did get up and I said, listen, parents, you're waiting for the government to ban TikTok. If you don't want it on your kid's phone, you take it off. And then you take it off. And if your friends' parents, if the kids' parents take other kids' parents take it off, then we'll all just be mean parents together. But ultimately, like everything that we deal with in our lives, we have to be the change. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. So parents do need to step up in this area, Amy, and just say no, honestly, sometimes.
Yep.
And at times mock it. Put on your fridge. Have your child come up with do you think I'm a tyrant? Okay, let's put that word down. Tyrant. Do you think I'm a B word? Okay, we'll put the B word down. Do you think I'm being a dictator? Okay, we'll put those words on the fridge so we're all on the same page. I own that. I'm your parent. It's a blessing. I get to see this in your life.
Owning it from birth, going back to the very first question from Shirley, from birth, I was like, you got to figure it out a lot of the time, even when they're little. I mean, my kids know my face when I'm looking at them in the wrong way, or if when I say no, I mean no, so it's starting at a young age. And I think a lot of people, from birth want to have that attachment. But like you said earlier, the friend thing that goes on with parents and children is also detrimental. So it's, just setting.
If I can encourage you, what I would recommend you do is get your own YouTube channel and that you be an influencer, because we need parents. The idea that we often talk about this is common sense, everyone knows. We have generations now into where we outsource parenting. Generation X was the first generation that en masse put our children in infant care. So we never established those relationships where we had the look at me response and we gave them the look. We never established that. We never established meals because we worked late. And so we picked it up at McDonald's. So for many parents, they're coming into this conversation late. And how do we begin? Give me an orientation of how this is done. Sometimes we talk as though the knowledge that our grandmothers and great grandmothers had, that somehow it's inherited in our DNA as women, and it's not. And we need moms like you who can go out and say, I have this type of relationship with my child, and I've withstood them saying, I hate you. I'll never forgive you. Yep, they can say that, and we're going to keep going.
Yeah. And we also have dinner around the table every single night.
That is one of the most, we brought that up at SEL 101, Amy. We talked about it. The most important thing that we've done as a family is that family dinner every night. And even when I'm traveling, my husband still has it with the kids. It's a really important time of day.
It is. Really.
Thank you for that question, Amy. Kid Hart says, I'm with you 100%, Amy. And yeah, we do. You're right, Jennifer. We do need to pass on and to talk to other moms and to help them. I remember early on getting involved in Head Start and Healthy Start in my community. And, we would do like seminars with moms and say, you can talk to your baby, right? It doesn't matter what you're talking about. It can be, look at this orange, look at the color, you smell it, right? You're always talking and building their vocabulary. And that's such a big part of their development and ultimately their school success. I think we have another question from Abigail. I'm going to read something just for people to know. And in a 2014 survey from Highlights magazine, Jonathan Haidt says that 62% of kids felt their parents were often distracted by their cell phone when the child tried to talk with him. Jennifer, one of the things that I kind of learned and that my mom taught me was listen to the little things when the kids are little, because then if you're a good listener and you have that established relationship, they'll come to you and talk to you about the big things. Any thoughts on, creating that communication with your kids from an early age?
Behavioral momentum. Yeah, it starts at infancy. I would encourage us, whatever you can cut out of your own life, get your priorities in order. Get your priorities in order and recognize then that life does throw us circumstances where we had to work, we had to spend more time away. Maybe we had a divorce in the midst. Things happen in life. Well, it's never too late. But no, it's going to take a lot of energy to get that behavioral momentum going because we've been stagnant in building that relationship. And unfortunately, for better for worse, your child may have formed that relationship with someone else. And we need to take that back. So what does that mean? It means more time in. We need to spend more time. Make sure that time in with us is something that our child wants to do.
Yeah.
And figure out who our children are as individuals. That goes into the concept of goodness of fit. We need to recognize that our children are not mirrors of us, where we maybe enjoyed these set of activities with our parents or our mothers. We have a very different little person in front of us. Get to know them and what makes them tick. And of course, they need to obviously do things that we like to do, but it's reciprocal. We do that. We figure out what they like to do and we provide opportunities. That, and then one more thing, a mentor. I had an assignment a couple of years ago with my students where I had them go out and try to identify mentors. And they would identify up front what are activities that they would have liked to have had a mentor as a child. And then they went online, because I thought this was going to be a simple assignment. Go out and find a mentor, find some influencer who is doing that type of job, engage in that type of activity, whatever it is. But I said the additional challenge was somebody that you would want your child to spend time with. The students came back furious because it was so hard for them as college students who are discerning to try to find appropriate mentors who are influencers out there. When they would start watching these YouTube influencers, it was time and again, all this behavior came up that they said, I would never want that in front of my child. So we need to find, it's us, step one, as the primary influencer in our children's lives. But then don't assume that that particular soccer coach that your school has hired is an important influencer in your child's life. That's someone that you would want them to model after. And don't assume that somebody that is whatever it is that they're into is going to be the type of person that you're going to want to have modeled. You have to research that person. So it takes just time and energy.
It's interesting you talk about your students, and then Abigail, I'll let you ask your question. It's interesting. I take a lot of the calls from high school kids and college kids, and I'll send them to websites to look at the books. There was this big book banning hoax that, the moms were going crazy, church moms not wanting to have, meanwhile, there's like really serious graphic sexual content we're calling out. But I've said that to the kids. I've said, now, would you read that book to your little brother? Is that something that you would, you're telling me I have a problem, but would you be okay with that? And I have yet to have one of them say, oh yeah, that's fine. Actually, one guy said he was a communist and read Marx and Hegel, and he told me that he disagreed with me about everything. But other than that one kid, Jennifer, I have to tell you, you're spot on. The kids, they know when something isn't right. Abigail,
and as they are growing, they're learning to discern. Because that was another thing that came out of my survey with the students. They would have liked more control as children, to be more controlled as children. And they all said we would have hated it at the time, but looking back, we wish someone would have put the stop on this for us.
Wow. That's moms. I hope you're listening. That's a hard, it's really so interesting, Jennifer. Hey, Abigail, how are you? You're
Hi.
back.
I'm so glad you brought up the issue of role models, because in chapter 6, Dr. Haidt, he talks about prestige bias in the realm of social media. So children see their social media influencers. They see them having this extreme behavior because that's what's popular on social media platforms. That's what gets views and goes viral. And we have seen such an uptick in violent and disrespectful behavior in the classroom. And so many teachers are saying they're leaving the profession because the kids are so violent and out of control. Do you think this behavior is really a direct consequence of this prestige bias in relation to social media?
I don't know necessarily that it's prestige bias. I think it's more an effect of desensitization. When you have so much stimuli coming in on a daily basis that's violent and that's graphic, you're desensitized to the experience of it. And so I think within certain peer groups, within certain schools, within certain communities, the threshold of what's dangerous, the threshold of what is going to be considered lawful and ordinary and normal, we've just extended that. And so I think that it's more, I would argue that it's in a way more universal, that it's not, did a particular child, have they been watching a particular content? It's that this content continuously coming at you desensitizes you to the world around you and the real world consequences of which you're not seeing when you're just visually engaging with material. That there's a real world consequence to acts of violence, a real world consequence of breaking the law. But then we get into the whole idea of teachers are not in control of their classrooms. Schools, administrators have abdicated their responsibilities and are not calling the police when they should. And so we have a group of kids who are not dealing with what would be normal real world consequences of their actions.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question, Abigail. And again, Jennifer, Abigail is like such a champ pro. She has been such an amazing person to work on the book club. So she's just doing a great job. I think we have another question from Carrie in Texas. Hey, Carrie, what's your question for Dr. Kalm?
Well, a couple of things. I was really interested. I've been doing a study on mandatory reporting and the pedophiles and the abusers that stay within our school districts. So would you mind sending me the information you have on the negative sides of mandatory reporting? We're trying to get an Office of Inspector General here in Texas to oversee the TEA. And so I would just love that information.
I would love to send this to you, and I would encourage you to distribute it widely.
Okay.
Yes.
The second thing is we were just talking about how parents, it's hard to be that parent that tells your kids no. And as I've gotten older, more and more of my childhood friends have come to me and said, I was always so jealous while we were staying out all night. Your parents cared. They never let you out. They did. They were liberal. I mean, they were, but they were at every game, but they set boundaries. And I was always so jealous that your parents cared so much. So there is a reward for that. And I've told them 100 times. I love that you talk about the natural worry and concern that we're born with. And the book, The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker, talks about how we're the only mammal on the planet that proactively tries to avoid that knowledge and that gift of fear that we're born with. Don't get on that elevator. Something told me not to go in that store at that time. And there's one called, he wrote one for children called Protect the Gift. And it talks about that. So that gets into my question. We have social media, which teaches that you can say hateful things and then just exit the room and there are no repercussions. We have, 30% of our new hires in Texas are not certified educators. They become that way. And they're teaching our kids, find a trusted adult, all of those things that go against that natural gift of fear that we're born with. And meanwhile, our schools are doing more and more mental health clubs and sexual assault clubs and gay clubs and sexual clubs. I'm on the mental health subcommittee for our school advisory health council, which all of our mental health, our sex ed stuff has to go through before it goes to a school board. And I'm having a hard time educating well-meaning professionals that we need a lot less of the mental health focus and a lot more on the physical education where they can go out and interact with each other, like he talks about in chapter 11, that we need more of that play-based knowledge for them. Without giving them a book, I've given them books, and of course they just go, oh, yeah, okay, I'm about to read that. What is the best way? And don't ask me to write it. What is the best synopsis of things I can give them that says our kids need the opposite of what you're trying to push down their throats? How do I educate them best?
That's a big question. And it's hard to do because, there are books so just really quick. I love books. So Saving Normal. We need to be honest about how the field of psychology is a group of individuals who are asking a series of questions, trying to understand complex behavioral patterns. It's a stream. And once we throw a grid over it, it changes the stream. So the very act of measuring changes that which is measured. When we talk about the field of psychology, it's as though we're talking about something that happens on an island with people in lab coats. It isn't. This one's saving normal. An insider's revolt against out-of-control psychiatric diagnosis, DSM-5, big pharma, and the medicalization of everyday life. That get them to recognize that, but this is where it's complex, because how do you get someone to recognize if they don't want to read the book? And if you, yeah.
Well, I just sent my kids go to Catholic school. I thought they were safe. Ha ha ha. That's so funny. Our school nurse on Friday just sent out an email that she wants to do a mental health survey for all of the high schoolers, 9th through 12th grade, and blah, blah, blah. And I immediately called her. We got it stopped. It's going to be opt-in and only for kids that have already expressed a mental health issue at school. And I recommended Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier to her because it's a pretty easy one to do. But a lot of professionals, and especially in public school, as soon as they hear Moms for Liberty, they shut me out. But I don't know how to get them to make that connection and go, oh my gosh, could we really be screwing up these kids?
So I think, as more and more mental health supports have gone into schools, I talked about this a little bit at this SEL 101, we see that the suicide rate jumps up when kids are in school and goes down when kids are not in school. So there's some evidence to show that there's something about school that is affecting the mental health of children. And proficiency rates have gone down, reading, writing, math, and we somehow have forgotten that children get a lot of confidence from mastery, Jennifer, and maybe you could talk on that, a mastery of a skill. And so one thing I would do when addressing school boards and school districts in general would be to look at the proficiency rates, to look at how the kids are doing in reading, writing, math, science, and to try to remind them that their primary function is to educate the students and to really try to get them back on track for the basics. Jennifer, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would put boundaries around what is our responsibility and what is our goal. What's the responsibility of educators and an educational system? Let's focus on that. And everything goes through that lens of what did we agree upon, that this is the goal. This is what we are here to do. What's the structure? Let's agree upon the structure. Then the how becomes a lot easier, because if we don't agree on the structure, the how for many people is including psychology in the classroom. It is including diagnosing kids and encouraging medication. That's the norm. Well, let's get back here. Let's agree on what it is. And then what are our goals, long-term goals? Let's look at outcomes, because we need to have an agreement on what are we going toward with the end in mind. So agree on the beginning and then agree on what we're looking at for outcomes.
That's great. Thank you for that question, Carrie. I appreciate you. Appreciate for you fighting in the private schools. I mean, we see this. We're going to come back to social emotional learning because we're going to close this out. And I appreciate your time so much, Jennifer. Social emotional learning has made its way into, I would say, probably at least 95% of schools across the country. Honestly, it's just pervasive. It is everywhere. And it has, parents oftentimes will ask, and we're going to take this question from Katie. Parents will oftentimes ask, I want to opt out. The truth of the matter is that you might be able to opt out of an exercise, maybe that happens at the beginning of the school day or the end, but so many of the elements of social emotional learning have been woven into the classroom, into all aspects. I think I shared with you, they have this thing called heart math, where they have the kids wearing heart monitors and they're watching to see when their heart spikes, then it's showing anxiety. I mean, just that alone would make me more anxious, I think. So, Katie asks, how can we convey to our local school boards the dangers of SEL and get it out of our schools? It kind of dovetails with Carrie's question too. How can we explain, and maybe you can help us. I think a lot of moms want to get up at school board meetings and maybe give a 3-minute speech about the dangers of social emotional learning. So if you were going to get up at a school board, no pressure, but if you were going to get it up at a school board meeting and you were going to share as a parent why you're concerned about social emotional learning, what would you say?
I would explain, this is how I define my role as a parent, my rights and responsibility. Here's how I'm going to share with you what our general historical understanding of what your responsibility is as an educator, as a school board. I would ask that we respect each other's realms. We each have very different but complementary and at times overlapping vocations, but you do you and allow me the freedom of doing me. And at the end of the day, I'm the one who has a lifetime responsibility to this child, not you.
How do you think they've been able to divorce the idea of mental health interventions in school from healthcare?
Let me think about that a second. I think that mental health services have become it's the water we breathe. It's the language that we use. Ever since Freud at the turn of the last century, we have a language about feelings and emotions. It's pervasive. We talk about social emotional in the classroom. It's in our everyday lives. When we go to work, we have seminars on how to get along with each other. When women entered into the workforce, men had to be educated on how they should approach and talk to women and how we should engage with one another. Psychology and our and part of it's a blessing that we have this language to describe this additional layer of understanding ourselves and understanding the other. Where it gets messy is when you start doing it for pay. And that is messy. And we have with the millennials, this was the first generation who, again, are the parents of Generation Z. Millennials are the first generation that adopted the idea that if I have a problem, I don't go to my parents, I don't go to my friend, I go to a therapist.
Mm.
That's the knee-jerk response that we all have.
Yeah.
And then as a friend, as a sister, as a coworker, when something comes our way and it's complex and we're not sure exactly what to say, how many times has it come out of our mouth? Maybe you should go talk to somebody about that, which implies don't talk to me about this.
I'll tell you, you want to hear, I'm going to share a personal story quickly with you. And Pat Blackburn, who's the national chapter director for Moms for Liberty, will remember this well. I was cyber stalked by someone on the internet, on Twitter and Facebook for a period of time. And it was pretty bad. They said horrible things. They would do it, especially when I was during school board meetings. And it was difficult to deal with. And I wanted to try to figure out who it was and who was doing it to me. And I went to the police. And they said, well, how has it affected you? And I said, well, it's been really difficult. I mean, when some kids said some things to my daughter that were online, and that was very hurtful and hard to deal with. And they said, well, have you gone to see a psychologist? And I said, or a psychiatrist? I said, no. I said, I've been exercising and I have a glass of wine once in a while. And I've talked to my one of my best friends, and that was Pat. And and had actually spoken to a pastor at one point, but that wasn't good enough. They wanted to know, had you gone to the doctor? Were you on any medication? Right? That was like that was the threshold of harm. And because I hadn't done that, then I wasn't really hurt by what was happening. And it was so interesting. Do you see that in other facets with the kids?
Yes, absolutely. And here's something to keep in mind that I don't believe Haidt talks about. When children, of which this group, so millennials as parents were the first to en masse go to therapists, then they're having their children en masse, and teachers are encouraging parents to take their children en masse to therapists. For insurance purposes, in order to be reimbursed, a therapist has to provide a diagnostic label. You have to have something in order for insurance to reimburse you as a therapist. So this idea also, we need to be, this is far reaching, but we need to be cautious in saying that this genuinely is such an anxious and depressed generation based on diagnoses, because in order to get reimbursed, we need to have a diagnosis.
That Abigail goes into that.
We love those words. We like to have a word to describe it. So those that are going through grief of a loved one that was near and dear to their heart, if you do it beyond what others would say is appropriate, we now have a new word for that in the DSM. That was the latest revision, is prolonged grief. So do you have that diagnosis? Well, it doesn't matter. I'm experiencing extreme loss. And no, to your point, and no, we don't have to go talk to someone professionally for this. We can and do thrive through major adversity.
That's so wonderful. I mean, I think
it's to recognize that without numbers, without a label.
That it's okay to be sad if your grandma dies, or that it's okay, but that we're resilient and we can push through it. And that's such an important part of being a mom and being able to teach that. And so I just recommend to everyone, Dr. Kahn, we appreciate your time so much. Really. And thank you for being a part of that SEL 101. If people watching today haven't watched that panel, please do. We did an SEL 102 with Abigail Schreier talking about bad therapy. You'll see in the comments, so many people have read that book. It's been so helpful. I know a lot of people have given that to their school boards, to principals, to superintendents, to try to show the iatrogenic risks of therapy in the classroom being disguised as social emotional learning. This is the end of our book club for today. I'm so glad that you were able to join us, Jennifer.
I'm so sorry about all the technical issues that I had at the start. Here it is, a talk on technology, and I'm having major technical issues.
Listen, you know what? I think it makes us more real. Moms for Liberty is a gritty organization. We've always been out there just trying new things. So we work through problems, no problem. So I'm just going to say thank you to you. We really appreciate talking to you about the anxious generation. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Any last parting words of wisdom for our moms as they kind of, get off of this call and look at their kids and figure out how they're going to navigate this social media and technology in their lives?
Just a statement that we have this as moms. Doing something is better than doing nothing. And now you have information. Information is power. We can do this. Previous generations face their own challenges. I have plenty of books on my bookshelves that go through what's wrong with kids today. Every generation has always said, what's wrong with kids today? This generation is going to be stronger as a result of what they're going through today. And we just need to do the best that we can to help them along the way. We've got this.
And find another mom whose kids you really think they're doing a good job. You brought up that point. The best thing you can do, if you see kids who are great and well-adjusted, go to that mom and say, hey, you want to be a mentor? You want to give me a little advice? How did you handle this? We'll help each other.
Yep. Humble ourselves and listen.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Jennifer. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone for joining us for the first book club of 2025. The book club has been a part of the M4LU month-long focus on social emotional learning, a complex topic that I just applaud Robin Steeman, Abigail Prado, all of the people that have joined us for the different events to tackle. It was something that we've been talking about at Moms for Liberty, and I've been talking about for the past few years in different circles. And the first time I brought it up, people just didn't really get the connection. And now I think people really, truly are understanding the role that it is playing in denigrating the relationship between the parent and the child. We've learned a lot this month, and we've learned that just because an idea is defeated by logic and reason doesn't mean it goes away. So yes, folks, CRT and DEI are still out there, and we will be taking a fresh look at those issues in the month of February. In spirit, please join us on February 24th for our book club. In that spirit, excuse me, I'm so bad at reading. In that spirit, please join us on February 24th for our book club discussion of race Marxism with the author, Dr. James Lindsay, who we will also see as part of next week's live panel event, CRT 101, live stream to the Moms for Liberty YouTube channel. It's such an exciting event that we'll be having, so don't miss it. Thank you again for joining us today. These issues are complex, as I said, but it's so important to understanding because our children are faced with them every single day. If you want to be an expert, you've got to read the book. And why read it alone when you can read it with friends? We are so grateful to all of you for tuning in and taking the time to understand the mental health crisis amongst our youngest generation and what you can do to stop it. There is certainly hope on the horizon. Have a great week.